whether the president is mentally capable of continuing in the job. I mean, the behaviour that we have witnessed since you and I both decided to take a week off is absolutely staggering. It has featured just in the last few hours a remarkable, aggressive ad hominem attack on Pope Leo, who of course has responded within the last few hours saying that he's not looking for a fight with the Trump.
In the space of a single week, the same conflict has been described as close to ending, then escalating, then open to negotiation, then moving towards a naval blockade. At some point, you have to stop and ask what actually holds all of that together. Before we get into this, subscribe to the Public Cross Exam, evidence-led analysis of public arguments. Just what the facts actually show. On LBC, Simon Marks lays out a series of developments that are all on the record. The United States first downplays the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, then days later moves towards military action that puts that same waterway at the center of events. At the same time, Vice President J.D. Vance publicly signals space for diplomacy. That position is then overtaken by a new announcement from the president. Those are not interpretations, those are the shifts being described in real time. Let's walk through the exchange, and then we will look carefully at what follows from it.
It's a week since I spoke to Simon Marks. During that time, the war has been won, lost, won, lost, won, lost, won, and lost, and put on hold. And the negotiations have succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, and never took place in the first place. Have I got that more or less right, Simon?
I think more or less right, James. I mean, I think we've entered in the days since you and I last were together there in Leicester Square about 10 days ago. I think we've entered a new phase in the Trump presidency. And it is a phase in which the question is going to become unavoidable for figures like Vice President J.D. Vance and other senior figures in the administration relating to whether the president is mentally capable of continuing in the job. I mean, the behaviour that we have witnessed since you and I both decided to take a week off is absolutely staggering. It has featured just in the last few hours a remarkable, aggressive ad hominem attack on Pope Leo, who of course has responded within the last few hours saying that he's not looking for a fight with the Trump administration, but certainly is not going to stop speaking out about the bellicose nature of this particular president. But that blockade is in and of itself the clearest example yet of the extent to which this president has lost the plot. The Strait of Hormuz was open to shipping before President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to engage in what appears to have been a completely illegal war on Iran. Illegal to the point where European leaders, including the Prime Minister, say they will not get involved directly in the conflict and give President Trump what he wants from them. And now we're in a situation where President Trump is about to launch a US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the same Strait of Hormuz that he was determined to liberate when the Iranians said that they were going to blockade it, but also the same Strait of Hormuz that last week on several occasions the president said was no concern to the United States, didn't trouble him. Such a paltry amount of oil used in the United States passed through that strategic waterway that it was up to other countries to figure out how they were going to liberate the Strait of Hormuz. This is completely strategy-free now. It has been from February the 28th, the moment when the conflict was ignited. J.D. Vance did his best, I think, in Islamabad over the weekend, but then was completely hung out to dry by the President of the United States, because Vance said, even though there'd been no agreement, the United States was hoping that over the course of an unclear period of time, the Iranians were going to understand that what the United States had presented was a final and complete offer to them. He was giving those conversations a window for more oxygen and more time to try and bear fruit. And what did Donald Trump do back in the United States, where, of course, he could have spent the weekend at the White House in the Situation Room, observing the talks at close hand and staying very much in touch with them minute by minute, second by second, but instead boarded Air Force One and flew to Miami to attend a UFC bout, one of those ultimate fighting contests that he so enjoys. So what did he do to upend J.D. Vance? He suddenly announces this naval blockade, which makes no sense, has no legal basis, and doesn't appear to have any international support other than what we're hearing from Israel and Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I hesitate to do this, but we circle back once again to the question of what it will take for the people around him to act. Because, I mean, there are two things that could happen now. They could carry on doing what they've always done, i.e. sweet FA, or they could finally find some backbone. And the longer it goes on, oddly, the less likely it seems to me that backbone will suddenly appear.
Well, I think that there are many people that face questions, including the American journalism crew here. I mean, are we going to get to the point where J.D. Vance is asked by any interviewer in the United States whether he has considered invoking the 25th Amendment of the Constitution to declare the president no longer capable of performing his duties? And if he hasn't given that any thought, why not? I mean, we haven't seen that question yet being posed to the Vice President of the United States. The Vice President finds himself in a very difficult position, of course, because even if he was thinking this can't go on the way it's going at the moment, we are heading for an absolutely crushing defeat in midterm elections this November. Now, even waging rhetorical war on the Pope at the very moment J.D. Vance is preparing to publish a second autobiography all about his journey towards becoming a practicing Catholic in the United States. I mean, so that's another issue for Vance to have to deal with. But the difficulty that he faces, of course, is that President Trump has surrounded himself with sycophants and entirely pliant members of his cabinet, all of whom have poured praise on him in every single one of those televised cabinet meetings that we've watched, and none of whom has got the backbone, it would appear at the moment, to stand up to him. So they find themselves now on a roller coaster, and it's definitely heading downhill currently with those midterm elections 7 months away, and the president taking action in the Gulf, this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that is guaranteed to send petrol prices at the pumps all over the United States soaring once again.
If we were to seek a summation with regards to the situation on the ground, or rather on the water in the Strait of Hormuz, nobody knows what's going to happen next, but only Donald Trump doesn't care.
Well, Donald Trump cares about one thing, and that became clear over the weekend. He simply wants Iran to cut him in on its oil. He wants to filch Iran's oil in exactly the same way as he's filched Venezuela's oil. He thought this was all going to be as easy as Venezuela over in a weekend. That was the bill of goods that was sold to him by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It hasn't turned out this way, but time and again he says, I just want the oil. I mean, words to those to those effect. And that's what he's after. And this is an effort to hold the Iranian regime basically to ransom, the brutal, murderous regime that he went to war saying that he wanted the Iranian public to rise up and replace. Now is the time for action, except we don't hear anything about that anymore. No. What he wants is the regime leaders to come to terms with him like Delcy Rodriguez did in Venezuela and cut him and American companies in on Iran's oil riches. That is what this is all about. And that's why there's a problem between him and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu wants the regime gone. The Saudis want the regime gone. Donald Trump wants to cut a deal with the regime. And so far, they are not responding to those desires in the manner in which he he wants to see.
I have got one more question, but I'm looking at the clock and it'll have to wait for our next conversation, which hopefully will be soon. Simon Marks, thank you.
Start with what we can verify. The Strait of Hormuz was open before this escalation. That is reflected in the exchange you have just heard. Shipping was moving, and there was no immediate disruption being described at that point. Then, military action begins. After that, the strait becomes central to the discussion, first as something to be protected, then, according to remarks referenced in the exchange, as something the United States does not need to prioritize. And now, as Simon Marks reports, we are looking at the possibility of a U.S. naval blockade. That is the sequence. When you place those positions side by side, the issue becomes clearer. The position is not just evolving, it is moving in different directions over a very short period of time. At the same time, there is a second track. J.D. Vance, speaking publicly, suggests there is still space for diplomacy, that conversations are ongoing, and that time is being allowed for them to develop. That is a consistent and recognizable diplomatic position. But then, that position is overtaken by a different decision. Not gradually, not with a clear explanation, it is simply replaced. That matters because it creates two signals at once, one suggesting restraint, the other pointing towards escalation. Now, it is normal for governments to adjust policy. Circumstances change, new information comes in. What is harder to follow here is the absence of a clear line connecting one decision to the next. The explanation is not being set out in a way that allows you to understand why the position has shifted. That is where the description of this being strategy-free comes from in the exchange, not as a label, but as an attempt to describe the lack of continuity between decisions. There is also a change in emphasis that should be noted. Earlier framing focuses on pressure on the Iranian regime and broader political outcomes. Later in the discussion, the focus turns towards leverage and access to resources, particularly oil. That is a shift you can hear in the conversation. And when the objective shifts, it becomes harder to measure what success looks like, because the aim is no longer fixed. There are practical consequences to that. Allies become cautious, as referenced in the exchange. European leaders are already signaling limits to their involvement. Markets respond to uncertainty. The Strait of Hormuz is a key route for global oil supply, so any disruption there has wider economic implications. And domestically, mixed messaging makes it harder for the public to follow the direction of policy. That brings us to the institutional question raised towards the end of the exchange. The United States has formal mechanisms for addressing presidential capacity. The 25th Amendment is one of them. That is a matter of public record. What is being pointed out here is that so far, those questions are not being raised in any formal way by those closest to the president. That is not a conclusion. It is an observation based on what is and is not happening. You can agree or disagree with the policies being discussed, but the pattern itself is visible. Positions change quickly. Statements do not always align, and the explanation linking those decisions is not clearly set out. That is what this exchange is asking you to look at. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you see this as a series of tactical adjustments or something that points to a deeper issue in how decisions are being made? If this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribe to the Public Cross Exam. Thanks for watching.